Caleb Turner had lived on the edge of the New Mexico frontier for most of his adult life. He was not a rich man or an important man. He was simply a ranch hand who worked hard, kept to himself, and treated people with respect. His home was a small wooden cabin built by his own hands near the dry hills, and his closest companion in the world was his horse, Dustwind. The horse was more than just an animal for him. Dustwind carried him to work, to town, and across the lonely plains. The horse protected him in dangerous moments and never failed him in storms. Caleb always said that Dustwind was the only friend who listened without judgment. Late one afternoon, Caleb was returning from a small town where he had collected a few supplies: flour, dried beans, and a little coffee. The sun was sinking low, turning the sky orange and gold. Caleb rode Dustwind slowly, planning to reach home before nightfall. The land around him was silent except for the faint cry of a distant hawk. Everything felt calm, peaceful, and almost too quiet. As Dustwind trotted along the trail, Caleb noticed something strange near the creek bed below, something dark, glimmering faintly in the fading light. At first he thought it might be a broken wagon piece or some stray cloth, but then Dustwind snorted uneasily, ears twitching. Caleb trusted his horse's instincts, so he slowed down and guided Dustwind toward the creek to investigate. When he reached the dry bank, Caleb noticed streaks of something on the rocks. He jumped down and crouched closer. There, smeared across the pale stones, was dried blood. Caleb looked around carefully, scanning the area. He did not see any footprints except for a faint trail leading toward the bushes. His heart tightened. Blood on the rocks usually meant someone was hurt, maybe badly. In the frontier, accidents happened too often. People could fall, get attacked by wild animals, or face dangers from groups that wandered the land. Caleb felt a familiar sense of concern. He could not ignore something like this. He followed the faint trail carefully, keeping Dustwind close. After a few steps, he saw a figure half hidden behind a cluster of dry shrubs. Someone was lying there, still, silent, and alone. Caleb rushed forward and knelt beside the person. It was a young woman, dressed in worn clothing made from buckskin. Her hair was long and dark, braided loosely before coming undone from her struggle. She had a deep cut on her arm and bruises on her face. She was breathing, but only faintly. Caleb recognized the style of her clothing. She was Apache. He froze for a moment. The frontier was a dangerous place for misunderstandings. Helping someone from another community could create trouble, especially when tensions were high. But looking down at her pale, hurt face, Caleb could not bring himself to walk away. She was injured, alone, and needed help. His conscience did not allow him to consider anything else. He carefully touched her shoulder and spoke softly. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The woman opened her eyes only halfway. They were full of pain and fear. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came out, only a weak breath. Caleb noticed she was trying to push herself away, as if expecting him to harm her. He shook his head quickly, his voice calm. "I'm not here to hurt you. You're hurt. Let me help." She blinked slowly, watching him with uncertainty. Her breathing was quick and shallow. Caleb knew she needed water. He took his canteen and held it gently near her lips. She drank only a small amount, but even that gave her a bit of strength. Her eyes softened slightly, showing less fear. He looked at Dustwind, then back at the woman. "I can get you to shelter. You can't stay out here. It's going to get cold soon." She did not answer, but she also did not resist when he slid his arms under her shoulders and lifted her carefully. She was lighter than he expected, but her body was tense from pain. Dustwind stood still as Caleb placed her gently across the saddle. Caleb took the reins and began to walk beside the horse. Dustwind walked carefully. Understanding the seriousness of the moment, the trail to Caleb's small line cabin was long. but it was the only safe place he could think of. The woman tried to speak once more, her voice thin. "Why, you help?" Caleb glanced up at her. "Because you needed it," he replied simply. "That's reason enough." They walked for miles. The sky darkened fully, and the stars appeared one by one. A cool wind swept across the plain. Caleb continued walking, holding Dustwind's reins with one hand and steadying the woman with the other whenever the horse shifted. She drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering words in her language that Caleb didn't understand. Finally, they reached the small cabin, more of a shelter than a home. It was a place Caleb used during long work days on distant parts of the ranch. It contained only the basics: a bed, blankets, a small stove, and some tools. But it was warm, dry, and safe. Caleb pushed the door open and guided Dustwind close enough so he could lift the woman inside. She winced from pain, but her eyes showed a hint of trust now. Caleb laid her on the bed and covered her with blankets. He lit the small oil lamp, bringing a soft glow to the room. He cleaned her wounds with warm water, moving slowly so she wouldn't panic. Her injuries were not fatal, but she was weak from loss of blood and exhaustion. He wrapped her arm with clean cloth and placed a folded blanket under her head as a pillow. For a long moment she stared at him silently. Her breathing became steadier. At last she whispered, "My name, Nayeli." Caleb nodded gently. "Nayeli, I'm Caleb." She tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't allow it. Caleb placed a hand in the air, not touching her, just signaling her to rest. She understood and relaxed back against the pillow. Rain began to fall outside, tapping against the cabin roof. The sound filled the room with a calm rhythm. Caleb added a small log to the stove, letting the warmth spread. He noticed her eyes following his movements. She seemed surprised by how gently he handled everything. Slowly, she spoke again. Far from my people." Caleb nodded. "You're safe here. You can stay until you're strong again." She blinked, trying to process his kindness. "You give horse to me," she said weakly. Caleb looked at her, puzzled. "What else could I do? You couldn't walk. My horse was the only way to help you." Nayeli stared as if she could not understand why someone would make such a sacrifice. Dustwind was clearly important to him, yet he had given the horse to her without hesitation. "You give your only horse," she whispered. "Why?" Caleb shrugged softly. "A horse can be replaced. A life can't." Nayeli's eyes softened deeply. No one had ever helped her like this, not someone outside her own people. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. She had been raised to be cautious, especially toward strangers, but this man had risked his safety for her without expecting anything in return. As the rain grew stronger, Caleb sat on the floor a few feet away, giving her space while staying close enough in case she needed help. He kept the lamp low so she could rest. The storm outside grew loud, but inside the cabin, the warmth made the small room feel safe. Nayeli opened her eyes again, after a long moment. Her voice was quiet but clear. "If my people find you, they think maybe you hurt me." Caleb nodded. "I figured that, but I had to help you anyway." She studied him for a long time, as though trying to understand the heart of this man. "I tell them truth," she whispered. "I will speak for you." Caleb smiled softly. "Thank you. But don't worry about that now. Just rest. You're safe tonight." Nayeli let her eyes close again. Her breathing became calm and slow. For the first time in hours, she felt safe enough to sleep. Caleb watched quietly, making sure she was comfortable. He knew the night ahead might be difficult. He didn't know who might be searching for her or whether the storm would keep danger away. But he felt no regret. Helping her was simply the right thing to do. Dustwind rested outside the cabin, snorting softly as the rain pattered against him. Caleb would check on the horse soon, but for now his attention stayed on the young woman whose life he had stumbled upon. He wondered who she really was, where she came from, and what trouble had brought her here. But those were questions for another day. Tonight was about survival, safety, and a small act of human kindness that had already changed everything. As the storm continued through the night, Caleb remained awake, listening to Nayeli's breathing. Somewhere deep inside, he sensed that this moment, this simple act of helping a stranger, was going to lead to something far bigger than he could ever imagine. The storm that began in the late evening continued deep into the night. Rain pounded against the cabin roof, and the wind made the wooden walls creak. Caleb Turner stayed awake, sitting near the small stove while watching Nayeli rest on the bed. He did not know what danger the next day would bring, but he was certain that leaving her alone would be wrong. He had made a choice, and he would see it through. Nayeli slept for a few hours, waking from time to time when pain shot through her arm or when the thunder grew loud. Each time she opened her eyes, she saw Caleb sitting quietly nearby. He had taken the corner of the room as his place to rest, choosing the hard floor instead of the bed. He wanted her to feel safe, not pressured or uncomfortable. At one point, Nayeli whispered his name weakly. Caleb leaned forward slightly. "I'm here," he said. She tried to shift her position and winced. Caleb immediately understood that she needed support. He placed an extra folded blanket behind her back so she could sit a little higher without hurting herself. Even small actions like this surprised her. Trust did not come easily to her people, but Caleb's gentleness made it feel possible. "You should rest," she murmured. "I will," Caleb replied, "once you're asleep." Nayeli studied him for a moment. His clothes were still wet from carrying her. His boots were muddy, and his face looked tired. Yet he had not complained once. She wondered what kind of man did this for a stranger, especially someone his people often feared. After she drifted back into sleep, Caleb stepped outside for a moment to check on Dustwind. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. He covered the horse with an old canvas sheet he kept near the door and rubbed Dustwind's neck to reassure him. The horse responded with a soft snort. When Caleb returned indoors, the cabin felt warmer. The fire crackled gently, lighting the room with a soft glow. He kept the lamp low so Nayeli could sleep peacefully. Hours passed slowly. Caleb's mind stayed alert. He thought about the blood on the rocks, the trail that led to her, and the danger she was in. He knew that if her people were searching for her, they might misunderstand everything. But even with that risk in mind, he felt no regret. He had done what any decent man should do. Just before dawn, the rain stopped completely. A faint light appeared behind the hills, marking the beginning of morning. Caleb stood and stretched his stiff muscles. His body ached from exhaustion, but he pushed the feeling aside. Nayeli stirred again, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around the cabin as if making sure she was still safe. "You made it through the night," Caleb said softly, stepping closer. She nodded with a tired smile. "Pain is less now." Caleb checked her bandage carefully. The bleeding had slowed, and the swelling around her wound had gone down. She had survived the hardest part. He poured some warm water into a tin cup and helped her drink slowly. She thanked him with a quiet voice. After a few minutes, she spoke again. "You did not sleep at all." Caleb shrugged gently. "I got enough rest sitting there." Nayeli shook her head weakly. "You stayed awake to watch over me." "I didn't want you to be scared," he explained simply. Her eyes softened. She had seen people act kindly before, but rarely with this level of patience and quiet strength. She wondered if his kindness came from past experiences or if he simply had a gentle heart by nature. Caleb warmed a bowl of beans on the stove and offered them to her. She ate slowly, grateful for every bite. Food gave her strength, and her face gained a bit of color. After she finished eating, she leaned back on the pillow and took a deep breath. "I was taken by another group," she said quietly. "Not my people. They wanted to trade me, but I escaped." Caleb listened carefully, not interrupting. "They chased me. I ran for a long time," she continued. "I tried to return to my band, but I became lost. My arm was hurt when I fell down a rocky slope." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought my people would never find me again." Caleb felt a deep sadness for her. "You're safe now. You can rest here until you're strong enough to travel." Nayeli looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you know what danger you face?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "I have an idea. If Apache warriors see a white man with a wounded Apache woman," she said slowly, "they may think he caused her harm." "I know," Caleb replied, "but I couldn't leave you there." Nayeli held his gaze. "Most men would think about themselves first." "That doesn't make it right," Caleb said softly. She looked down at her hands. His words were simple, but their meaning touched her deeply. As the morning continued, the cabin felt peaceful, but both of them sensed that this calmness might not last. Outside, the storm clouds drifted away, leaving the land clean and fresh. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth, and the distant hills sparkled under the soft sunrise. Nayeli tried to sit up more fully. Caleb helped her adjust a pillow, making sure she didn't strain her injured arm. She watched him as he worked. There was something steady about him, something reliable that reminded her of the guardians in her own tribe. But Caleb was not a warrior. He was simply a man who had chosen compassion in a moment when it mattered most. As the sun rose higher, Nayeli seemed more awake. She wanted to learn more about him. "You live alone?" she asked. "For the most part," Caleb replied. "I work on a ranch some miles from here. This cabin is for long days when I'm too far to return at night." "You do not have family?" "Not nearby," he said. "Some passed away. Some moved east. It's just me now." Nayeli looked at him with quiet sympathy. "Alone is hard." Caleb smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But Dustwind keeps me company, and the land here is peaceful." Nayeli glanced at the door, remembering the horse. "Your horse. You trusted him to carry me." "He's a good horse," Caleb said proudly. "Strong and loyal." She nodded slowly. "In my people, giving a horse to someone is a great gift. It shows trust." Caleb looked surprised. "I didn't know that. I just knew you needed help fast." Nayeli took a slow breath. "Still, you gave something important." Caleb didn't respond right away. He wasn't used to being thanked so sincerely. Most people in the frontier helped each other when they could, but his act had been more than simple assistance. He had risked his own safety for her. Hearing her acknowledge that made him feel strangely humbled. Later in the morning, Caleb stepped outside to gather firewood. Nayeli watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame to keep her balance. She saw him working patiently, his movements steady but careful, as if trying not to disturb the quiet of the moment. He stacked the wood neatly, checked his tools, and then walked to Dustwind to make sure the horse was comfortable. Something about his actions made her feel safe. She had met many people in her life, but she could count on one hand those who had treated her with genuine respect. Caleb was different. He treated her as an equal, even though he understood nothing about her background or her people. When he returned to the cabin, he noticed her standing by the door. "You should be resting," he said gently. "I feel better in the fresh air," she replied softly. Caleb stepped closer, ready to help her back to the bed. But Nayeli held out her hand lightly, signaling that she could walk on her own. Her legs were weak, but her spirit was strong. She took slow steps back to the bed and sat down carefully. "You're healing," Caleb said with a smile. "Yes," she replied, "because you helped." A quiet moment passed between them. Caleb took the chair and sat a few feet away so she wouldn't feel crowded. For a while, they didn't speak. The morning sunlight entered the cabin gently, lighting the dust particles in the air like tiny golden sparks. Finally, Nayeli broke the silence. "If my people come," she said softly, "they will ask many questions." "I expect that," Caleb answered calmly. "They may come in great numbers," she added, her voice low. "I know." Nayeli looked at him carefully. "You are not afraid?" Caleb thought for a moment. "I'm cautious." "But afraid?" "Not exactly. I trust that the truth matters." Nayeli listened to his words. She had never met someone who spoke with such calm certainty. She looked toward the window, where the land stretched far and wide. Somewhere out there, her people were searching for her, hoping she was alive, fearing she was lost. She knew the moment they found her would change everything for Caleb. She turned back to him. "I will speak for you. I will tell them how you saved me." "I appreciate that," Caleb said. "You did something very big," she whispered. "My people do not forget kindness." Caleb did not fully understand the weight of her words. He only nodded respectfully. As the sun climbed higher, Nayeli rested again. Caleb checked the horizon every so often. The land looked peaceful, but something deep inside him sensed that change was coming. He could not explain the feeling, but he trusted it. By the afternoon, the sky was clear. A warm breeze blew across the hills. Caleb stepped out to collect water from the creek and returned to find Nayeli sitting quietly, her eyes following the movement of the clouds. "Do you think your people will find us soon?" Caleb asked gently. Nayeli closed her eyes for a moment, listening to something only she could sense. "Yes," she whispered. "Very soon." Caleb felt his heartbeat tighten. He didn't know what their arrival would bring, but he stood by his choice. He saved her because it was right, and he would face whatever came next with honesty and courage. As the day slowly turned toward evening, both of them felt the quiet before the storm. Not a storm of nature, but a storm of fate. Caleb had no idea that hundreds of eyes were already watching from the distant hills, waiting for the right moment to approach. And Nayeli knew that the next sunrise would bring a change neither of them could fully imagine. The night passed quietly after the long storm, and the land around the small cabin seemed fresh and peaceful the next morning. But inside Caleb Turner's mind, a sense of tension was growing. He could not explain it clearly, yet he felt that something was changing in the air. Maybe it was the way the birds had stopped singing, or the way Dustwind kept turning his head toward the distant hills as if sensing something unseen. Animals always felt danger before humans did. Nayeli also looked restless. Even though her pain had lessened and her strength was slowly returning, she kept glancing toward the horizon every few minutes. It was clear that she was listening to something far away, something she could feel in her heart long before it appeared. Caleb noticed her worry. "You think your people are near?" he asked softly. Nayeli nodded. "Yes. They are searching for me. They follow trails, signs, and the voice of the land. They move fast when someone is missing." Caleb tried to stay calm. "Will they listen to you? Will they understand I was just trying to help?" "They will hear me," she replied. "But they come with fear when someone is lost. Fear makes people act quickly." Caleb understood. He had seen fear turn calm men into angry ones. He knew the same happened everywhere in the world. People protected their own. People fought when they believed someone they loved was hurt. He tried not to think about how 150 Apache warriors might react if they believed he had taken Nayeli against her will. The morning sunlight spread across the land as time moved slowly. Caleb went outside to check the surroundings. The hills looked empty, but something about their silence felt unnatural. He walked a little farther from the cabin, scanning the ground for signs, tracks, broken brush, anything fresh. He found nothing. But that did not comfort him. If warriors were approaching, they would move with great skill. They could ride without leaving much trace. They could appear as silently as shadows. When Caleb returned to the cabin, Nayeli was sitting up, her eyes focused on something he could not see. "You feel something?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "The wind carries signs. I hear movement far away." Caleb's chest tightened. Still, he kept his voice steady. "Whatever happens, I'll stand by the truth." Nayeli looked down at her hands. "I hope they come with calm hearts." Caleb gave a small, reassuring smile. "We'll face it together." The day grew warmer. Caleb cooked a little food for both of them. Nayeli ate only a bit, but enough to keep her strength. She spent most of the time resting, though her mind was clearly alert. Caleb stepped outside often, watching the hills. Dustwind stayed unusually still, his ears twitching in the direction of the distant ridges. By late afternoon, the sky turned a soft gold. The cabin was surrounded by quiet stillness. Caleb leaned against the fence outside, feeling his nerves grow heavier with each passing minute. He kept telling himself he had done the right thing, and he had nothing to hide. Then something changed in the air. A faint rhythmic sound, barely noticeable at first, drifted across the distance. It was soft, steady, and multiplied many times over. Caleb straightened immediately. Hoofbeats, not one, not two, dozens. Nayeli heard them too. She pushed herself up and went to the door, leaning against the frame. Her breathing grew fast. "They are here," she whispered. Caleb felt his heartbeat quicken, but his expression stayed calm. He stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Nayeli and the open land. The hoofbeats grew louder, rolling like distant thunder. Dustwind backed up nervously. Caleb stroked his neck, whispering calming words. Finally, over the ridge to the east, figures appeared. Riders, one after another, like a wave of shadows forming in the golden light. Caleb's breath caught. First 10 riders, then 20, then 50, then more. They came in rows spread across the hills, their silhouettes sharp against the setting sun. Each warrior rode with strong posture, carrying bows, lances, or spears. Their horses moved smoothly and silently. The number kept increasing until the land seemed covered with them. Caleb counted in disbelief. At least 150 Apache warriors. They surrounded the cabin slowly and deliberately, closing in from all sides without rushing, without shouting. Their presence alone was enough to make the ground feel smaller, the air heavier. Caleb raised his hands slowly to show he carried no weapon. He stepped a little forward, but kept enough distance so they would not think he was challenging them. Nayeli stepped out behind him, breathing heavily. Even though she was weak, she stood tall. She needed to be seen. One of the warriors rode forward, a man older than the others, with long dark hair and steady eyes. His face was lined with experience and authority. Nayeli whispered, "That is my uncle. He is a leader." The chief stopped a few feet from Caleb. His gaze was sharp, full of tension. He spoke in his language first, addressing Nayeli. She answered with difficulty, but her voice was filled with emotion. The chief dismounted instantly and rushed to her side. 2 other warriors followed, supporting her gently. Then the chief turned his eyes toward Caleb. There was suspicion at first, and anger born from fear that his niece might have been harmed. He spoke in English now, his voice deep and firm. "Did you bring her here?" Caleb nodded slowly. "I found her wounded near the creek. She was alone. I helped her. That's all." The chief's eyes narrowed. "Why would you help her?" Caleb met his gaze without fear. "Because she needed help, and because no one should be left to die alone." Several warriors exchanged glances. The chief studied Caleb's face for a long moment, searching for any sign of deceit. Nayeli struggled to step forward. "Uncle," she said softly, "he saved me. He gave me his horse. He carried me here. He fed me. He touched nothing without respect." Caleb lowered his gaze humbly as she spoke. The chief inhaled slowly. Then he raised his hand to stop the warriors behind him from stepping closer. He asked Nayeli more questions in their language. She answered every one of them, explaining how Caleb had found her, how he had cared for her wounds, how he had given up his only protection, his horse, for her safety. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the air. The chief stepped back, looking at Caleb with new eyes no longer filled with suspicion, but with something deeper: respect. Slowly, he turned to the warriors surrounding the cabin. He lifted his hand high. Every rider reacted immediately, sitting straighter in their saddles. Then, in a single coordinated motion, all 150 warriors dismounted. Caleb froze in shock. The warriors walked forward in a slow, deliberate formation. Caleb's heart raced. He did not know what they intended. He had never seen such unity, such silent power. The warriors formed a half-circle around Caleb. Nayeli stood behind him, breathing quickly but watching them with hope. Then the chief stepped forward again. He stood in front of Caleb, eyes steady, and said in a deep voice that carried across the silent land, "You did not have to save her. You could have walked away. But you chose kindness. You gave your horse, your strength, and your shelter. For that, we show you honor." And then, in an act that made Caleb's breath completely stop, the chief bowed his head to him, and so did every warrior in the long line. 150 Apache warriors bowed in respect to a single ranch hand. Caleb had never imagined such a moment in his life. His throat tightened. He swallowed hard, overwhelmed. He wasn't a hero. He had simply helped someone who needed help. Nayeli watched, tears filling her eyes. In her culture, a bow like this was rare. It was a gesture given only to the bravest, the most honorable. The chief raised his head and placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder gently, not as a warning, but as a sign of trust. "You are a friend to our people," he said. "From this day forward, no Apache will ever harm you. You walk safely in our lands." Caleb nodded, humbled beyond words. In that single moment, the fear, tension, and uncertainty melted away. What remained was something powerful, understanding between two worlds that rarely met with peace. And Caleb knew that the next events would shape his life in ways he had never imagined. Caleb Turner stood very still, surrounded by rows of Apache warriors, still trying to understand the moment he had just witnessed. A man like him, who lived a quiet, lonely life on the edge of the frontier, never imagined that one day more than 100 warriors would bow their heads to him. He felt humbled, surprised, and almost overwhelmed. He wasn't sure how to react or what to say. In truth, he didn't feel he deserved such honor. He had simply helped a woman who needed help. Nayeli watched the scene with soft eyes. She leaned slightly against her uncle, still weak but standing proudly. The wind blew gently through her hair as she looked from the warriors to Caleb. She had believed that her people would come. She had hoped they would listen, but she had never imagined this level of respect. This was something rare. In her culture, such a gesture meant deep honor and gratitude that would last for generations. The chief stepped closer to Caleb and spoke in a calm, strong voice. "We honor courage. We honor kindness. You saved my niece when many would have left her. Today, you stand as our friend." Caleb's voice came out quietly. "Thank you. I didn't expect—" He paused, searching for words. "I only did what felt right." The chief nodded. "That is why we respect you." 2 warriors stepped forward, leading 3 strong horses. Their coats shone in the sunlight, one chestnut, one gray, and one black. The chief gestured toward them. "These horses are gifts of gratitude, yours to keep." Caleb blinked in disbelief. I can't take those. They look valuable." "They are," the chief agreed. "But honor must be returned with honor. You gave your horse for her life. We return much more." Caleb didn't know what to say. He gently stroked the neck of the chestnut horse. It was powerful and calm, trained well for long distances. The gray horse had intelligent eyes, and the black one stood proudly, tall and strong. Receiving even one of these horses would have been an incredible gift. But 3? It was more than he could ever repay. Nayeli stepped closer, smiling softly. "In our tradition, giving horses is like giving respect. It shows trust." Caleb glanced at her, noticing how much stronger she looked now. Her color had returned, and her expression was peaceful. He felt grateful to see that she was healing. The chief then said, "You saved someone we love. Today we give you protection and friendship. If you ever travel in our lands, you will be safe. Any warrior who sees you will know you as the man who showed great kindness." Caleb bowed his head slightly in return. "I'm honored, truly." The warriors stepped back, forming lines again. Some prepared to return to their camp, while others stayed near Nayeli, checking her wounds and speaking softly to her. Caleb watched quietly as her people gathered around her with relief and affection. It was clear that she was deeply loved and important to them. For a moment, Caleb felt a strange emptiness inside. He knew that Nayeli would be going with her people soon. He was happy she would be safe, but a part of him felt lonely at the thought. After sharing the difficult night and watching over her, he had grown used to her presence. Now she would leave, and his cabin would return to being silent and empty once again. Nayeli noticed his distant expression. She walked slowly toward him, still holding her arm carefully. "You think I am leaving you behind," she said gently. Caleb gave a small, awkward smile. "You need to go with them. It's what's right." She nodded. "Yes, but it doesn't mean goodbye forever." That surprised him. "You think we'll meet again?" Nayeli looked out at the land around them. "This world is wide, but paths cross when they are meant to. You helped me when you had no reason to. That creates a bond that does not break easily." Caleb felt something warm inside, something he hadn't felt in years. Connection. He had lived alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to truly matter to someone. The chief approached again. "We will take Nayeli to our camp so she can heal fully. You may visit when you wish. You will always be welcome at our fire." Caleb nodded respectfully. "Thank you." As the warriors prepared to leave, Nayeli took a slow step forward, holding his hand gently for a brief moment. Her touch was light, respectful, filled with quiet gratitude. "You saved my life," she whispered. "I will not forget." Caleb felt his throat tighten slightly. "I'm glad you're safe." She gave him one last soft smile before turning to mount a horse with the help of 2 warriors. She sat tall, even in her weakened state. Then, with a final look back at Caleb, she nodded, an unspoken promise that their paths would cross again. The warriors formed into formation. The chief gave a signal, and one by one they began to ride away. The sound of their horses echoed across the land, fading slowly as they disappeared over the hills. Caleb stood alone outside his cabin, Dustwind beside him and the 3 gifted horses tied near the fence. The quiet felt heavy after the powerful presence of so many warriors. He watched until they vanished completely, then let out a long breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Dustwind nudged him gently, as if asking if everything was all right. Caleb rubbed the horse's neck. "We've had quite a day, old friend." He led the new horses to a shaded area and gave them water. They were strong and calm, adjusting quickly to their new surroundings. Caleb carefully checked their saddles and reins, noticing the craftsmanship. These were not ordinary horses. They were symbols of respect, trust, and deep gratitude. Inside the cabin, the smell of healing herbs still lingered from the night before. The blanket Nayeli had used lay neatly folded on the bed. Caleb picked it up and held it for a moment. It made the room feel less empty, but it also reminded him of how quickly life could change. He thought about Nayeli's words, how she believed they would meet again. That idea gave him comfort. The world suddenly felt less lonely and more full of possibility. Days passed, and Caleb continued his usual work, but something inside him had changed. Whenever he rode across the plains, he looked at the horizon differently. He wondered about the Apache camp, about Nayeli's recovery, about what she might be doing. He remembered her strength, her bravery, and the way she spoke with quiet dignity. One morning, about a week after the warriors had left, Caleb decided to ride toward the hills where they had disappeared. He wasn't sure if he would see them or if he was ready to visit, but his heart felt a pull he couldn't ignore. Dustwind trotted happily, and Caleb rode with a steady rhythm. The land felt peaceful, open, and welcoming. As he reached a ridge, he spotted something that made him stop. A single rider stood in the distance, watching him. As the rider approached slowly, Caleb realized who it was. Nayeli. She looked stronger, her posture firm, her eyes bright. Her arm was tied lightly with herbs, but she looked almost fully healed. She smiled when she saw him. "You came," she said gently. Caleb nodded, feeling warmth spread in his chest. "I wanted to make sure you were well." Nayeli dismounted and walked toward him. "I am healing. My people say it is because someone with a good heart protected me." Caleb chuckled shyly. "I just did what anyone should do." "No," she replied softly. "Not anyone. Just you." They stood facing each other in the quiet open land. No warriors, no danger, no fear. Just two people who had crossed paths in a moment of need and formed a bond that neither had expected. For Caleb, that day marked the beginning of a new chapter. His world felt larger, his heart felt lighter, and the land around him felt more alive than ever before. He had gained new friends, new respect, and a connection that would stay with him for the rest of his life. And as the sun dipped behind the hills, Caleb knew without doubt that one simple act of kindness had changed everything. Not just for Nayeli, but for him, for her people, and for the long stretch of land that